The biggest story that has been going around in the world of movies for the last number of months, ever since Paramount made their first bid, was that Warner Brothers Discovery is up for sale. And now the race is over. It was officially announced last night that Netflix has won the bidding war. Netflix has won it. They put in the highest bid and they won. And the reaction across the whole world of entertainment has been quick, it has been swift, and it has been very divided. Some very happy, some very upset. Rob, yesterday we talked about that letter, that just embarrassing letter that Paramount sent to Netflix. Clearly they got wind that Netflix had won the bid. I spoke to a couple of people at Paramount and they told me, now listen, I'm still going to be cheering for David Ellison and Paramount moving forward. Okay. I am. I'm going to hope for great things for them. I still think there's a lot of potential upside, but I talked to a couple people at Paramount yesterday who said, yeah, the feeling across the company was that David Ellison embarrassed the company yesterday. He embarrassed Paramount yesterday. And anyway, here's hoping that all continues to move forward. So that's it, guys. Netflix has won it. So what does that all mean? There are 5 key things I think we all need to understand, because as I've been looking across the discourse online about everybody talking about it, there seems to be 5 areas of questions. What happens with HBO? What happens with the executives? What happens? How much do they get it for? Do they own it right now? There's a lot of different questions. So I put together this little thing. There are 5 main things for us to know and understand about the Netflix deal, about Netflix buying Warner Brothers. The 5 things that we need to understand are, number 1, Netflix had the biggest bid. I mean, that's ultimately what it comes. Their bid was bigger than Paramount's and bigger than NBC Universal Comcast, outdoing Paramount and Comcast. The value of the deal is said to be, get this, $87.2 billion. That is bigger than the deal that Disney made to acquire 20th Century when they got it for $71.3 billion. The second thing, and we'll go into each one of these in detail in just a bit, but let me just go over them here quickly. The second thing we all need to understand about this deal is that the deal will take at least a year to actually come to completion, and won't begin to close until after Warner Brothers spins off their Discovery Television division. Remember, Warner Brothers announced a while ago that they were going to split Warner Brothers into 2, Warner Brothers Studio and HBO Max, and then all the TV assets. Remember that? Well, Netflix is only interested in owning Warner Brothers and HBO Max. So it's going to take about 9 more months for Warner Brothers to spin off that. And Netflix isn't even going to start to finalize the deal until after that's spun off. So it's going to be at least a year before Netflix owns Warner Brothers. So that's important for everybody to understand. The third thing that we need to understand about this is that Warner Brothers, the studio, according to what they're saying, will stay intact and will continue to put out movies, and their movies will continue to go to movie theaters. Again, we'll go more deeper into that in just a minute. The fourth thing for us to understand is that HBO Max will continue to operate as a standalone service. I know a lot of us were wondering if, Netflix gets Warner Brothers, are they just going to absorb it into? The official word right now is that HBO Max, the plan is for it to continue to function as a standalone service. We'll go into this more in a few minutes. And then fifthly, is that most of the current creative leadership is in fact staying with Warner Brothers. That includes Michael DeLuca, Pam Abdy, and James Gunn, that they are all staying. We're going to go into all this now, kind of one big thing at a time. So let's start with this first part here about Netflix had the biggest bid, $87.2 billion. The article, Netflix put out an official press release, and it said this. It said, Hollywood, California. Today, Netflix, this is yesterday, and Warner Brothers Discovery announced that they have entered into a definitive agreement under which Netflix will acquire Warner Brothers, including its film and television studios, HBO Max and HBO. The cash and stock transaction is valued at $27.75 per share, subject to stuff, with a total enterprise value of approximately $82.7 billion, equity value of $72 billion. The transaction is expected to close after the previously announced separation of Warner Brothers Discovery's global network division, Discovery Global, into a new publicly traded company, which is now expected to be completed in the third quarter of 2026. By the way, Rob, I want to point out this number here, that ultimately the bid they gave was for $27.75 per share. I believe the Paramount bid was somewhere around $26. So that's a significant difference.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to point this out, Rob. I think this is important for everybody to get. You know how I've been all about David Zaslav? I mean, I've taken a lot of crap from people for the fact that I have been, hey guys, David Zaslav's doing almost everything right. Because you got to remember, when David Zaslav took over Warner Brothers, it was a dying, dead hunk of meat patient on a operating table that had zero chance of survival. AT&T ran it into the ground. And when Discovery got Warner Brothers, the average stock price in the first 3 months was $16.50. That's what the market thought Warner Brothers was worth. Warner Brothers didn't have its own stock listing when it was still owned by AT&T. It was just AT&T stock. But once they spun it out and Warner Brothers was there on its own, its first 3 months average stock price was $16.50. It has now sold for $27.75 per share. Rob, that is an increase of 70% in 3.5 years. 70% in 3.5 years. That's all David Zaslav did for the company. So this represents, again, guys, a massive amount of money. I mean, $82.7 billion, again, worth significantly more, about $10 billion more than what the Disney deal to get 20th Century was. So that's a pretty huge thing. Okay. Well, let's look at the second thing that we're here to understand, which is that the deal will take at least a year and not happen until after Warner Brothers spins off WBD Global. Again, we go back over to the press release here. This said the transaction is expected to close after the previously announced separation of WBD Globals. That's not going to happen until Q3. And then after that happens, after all that, so we're talking about September, October, and then they start the finalization processes. And that's when they might, if there's going to be any government regulatory pushback, that's when they're going to have to deal with it. So guys, do not expect that tomorrow you're going to turn on Netflix and see House of the Dragon on Netflix. Maybe in some international territories they already do. I don't know. But don't expect, if you live in the United States, to pop on Netflix tomorrow and see Penguin on Netflix tomorrow. This is going to take, at the very earliest, a year to all get through. So don't expect anything huge and major. That means for the next year or so, everything is going to continue on business as normal. Nothing's going to be impacted. Everything's going to go ahead business as normal. And it's going to be at least a year before Netflix comes in and puts everything under their control. All right. The third thing we were going to look at here was that Warner Brothers will stay intact and continue to put out theatrical films. They are going to stay intact and continue to put out theatrical films. Again, this comes to us directly from the Netflix press release. Netflix expects to maintain Warner Brothers' current operations and builds on its strengths, including theatrical releases for films. They put it right in their own press release. Warner Brothers is going to stay intact. They're going to have their own operations. They're going to be doing their own things. the movies are going to continue to get theatrical releases. Now, Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos did hint that they might look at theatrical release windows, though. This is what he said. See, this comes to us from Variety, who said, CEO Ted Sarandos says Warner Brothers movies will remain in theaters. My pushback has always been mostly in the fact of the long exclusive windows, which we don't really think are that consumer friendly. I wouldn't look at this as a change in approach for Netflix movies or for Warner Brothers movies. I think over time, the windows will evolve to be much more consumer friendly to be able to meet the audience where they are quicker. I'd say you should count on everything that is planned on going to theaters through Warner Brothers. Will continue to go to the theaters through Warner Brothers. And he goes on to say in the same interview that the plan is still for Netflix movies may get some short theatrical windows, but I would expect to see everything with Warner Brothers go on normal. Now, when he says shorter windows and he says that his problem with theatrical has always been about the overly long theatrical windows, which he's totally wrong about, by the way. But I think he was talking about the 90-day windows as opposed to the more modern standard of 45. So the way I interpreted it, and I could be wrong, was that he made a distinction between Netflix releases and Warner Brothers releases, and saying that, hey, I don't really expect anything to change with Warner Brothers with the 45 days, maybe a little bit less, but the really short ones are going to be our Netflix originals, because that's the way we've always done it. Now, it could be, I'll get to this a little bit later about, I don't know how much I trust Sarandos, but we'll get to that in just a second. At least that's what we're going to now. But basically the underlying point is that the plan, they said they presented this to the Warner Brothers shareholders, that we are going to keep Warner Brothers as a company intact with its creative forces, and its theatrical division is still going to have theatrical release. And that's the plan. That's their commitment. Whether their commitment means anything or not, we'll talk about that as we progress. Okay, let's look at that fourth thing now. The fourth thing of understanding is that HBO Max will continue to operate as a standalone service. This comes to us from the Wall Street Journal, who wrote this. HBO and its streaming service, HBO Max, will continue to operate as a standalone, Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos said. Co-CEO Greg Peters said, the HBO brand is powerful to consumers. That gives us a lot of options to figure out how you package things in different ways, he said. Okay, so whether this means that we're going to continue to go on to have two completely separate, independently running streaming services, Netflix and HBO Max, or whether Netflix will start to package them together as a bundle. Hey, for $27 a month, you get Netflix and HBO Max. Or whether that means, like, you know how in Disney Plus, you now have Hulu right inside of Disney Plus. Maybe HBO Max becomes one of those things inside of Netflix. Like, you load up Netflix and you can look at your highest recommended, or you can click on the HBO Max option. I don't know what their ultimate plan is going to be there. They're saying they're not quite sure how they're going to bundle it all together. But the one thing they are saying is that they are going to keep HBO Max as a separate functioning entity. Again, that will bring up the questions of how much do we trust them on that. But that is at least what they're saying is their plan. That's what they think is good for them, and that's what they're going to do. All right. Now the fifth thing, and this is one that's going to be interesting to some people, that most of the creative leadership is staying, including Warner Brothers' Mike DeLuca, Warner Brothers' Abdi, and DC Studios' James Gunn. Now, this was implied in the statement that the press release that Netflix put out that said, hey, we're basically going to keep the company intact. That includes their creatives. Now, Rob, last night, like a lot of people, my phone was a flurry. Calling everybody I knew I could talk. Because, you know, I got the contact information of a lot of significant studio insiders. 9 times out of 10, they never respond to me. Half of 1 out of 10, they tell me to F off. And every once in a while, they actually respond to me and tell me, give me an answer. You guys remember, I'm just going to give you some context here. I was the first person on the planet a year and a half before they officially announced it, that Ben Affleck was out as Batman. And everybody called me a liar and everybody called me stupid. It turns out it was right. The person inside Warner Brothers who told me that is the same person that responded to me yesterday. When I asked the question, when it says that they're going to keep the company intact, does this or does this not mean that the creative heads like DeLuca and Abdi, Casey Bloys, who's the head of HBO Max, James Gunn, Peter Safran, David Zaslav, does that mean they're all staying? Basically, this is what he gave me. David Zaslav is a question mark. That's what this person wrote to me, that there are a couple of options on the table. One of the options is that they give him this huge, generous exit package to leave, or it is still theoretically possible he could stay to lead Warner Brothers as well. Either or, not really clear on that. What they are clear on is that Mike DeLuca, co-chair of Warner Brothers Films, is staying. Pam Abdi, also co-chair of Warner Brothers Films, is staying. You remember a little while ago, they announced that David Zaslav just gave them new contracts and new deals. And we'll see how that kind of stretches out. And then, of course, James Gunn. James Gunn, co-CEO of DC Studios, is staying, leading the DC Universe creative. And again, Rob, I got to ask, do you have any music playing in the background over there?
Nope.
Anything on your computer might be playing in the background? Because I've got nothing open on my machines. Anyway, it's kind of coming and going. So anyway, now I asked about Peter Safran, and what he said to me about Peter Safran was, I don't know for sure, but I think it's kind of assumed. I asked about Bloys, the guy who's the head of HBO Max.
Casey, yeah.
Casey, yep. Didn't have an answer for me on that, so I don't know about that one. But what I can tell you is that at least the creative studio heads, Mike DeLuca, Pam Abdi, and James Gunn, and by assumption, Peter Safran, I guess, they are all indeed staying. They're all staying on as well. So again, as we just run down the 5 key points to take away, the things you guys need to know that are most important about this Netflix deal is the following, is that Netflix, they were the biggest bid. It's not like they just didn't like Paramount. Paramount had the smaller bid. Netflix had the bigger bid, so they got it, $87.2 billion. It will not take full effect for at least a year, so don't expect Netflix to be running anything at Warner Brothers for at least a year. Warner Brothers will stay intact as a studio and will continue to put out theatrical films. HBO Max will continue to operate as a standalone service, and at least some of the creative heads of the studio division, DeLuca, Abdi, and James Gunn, are all going to be staying. That's at least the plan. Guys, we want to take a second to thank a sponsor of this video, Aura. Guys, if you are anything like me, you swear every year you're going to be on top of your Christmas shopping, and then suddenly it's December 20th, the shelves are empty, and you're standing around in Target asking yourself, does my aunt even like candles? But this year, I am not doing that because of Aura Frames. It's completely saved me. See, I always struggled with what to get people in my life, but this year I'm going to give out a couple of Aura Frames, and it's hands down the most personal, meaningful gift that I can possibly give. And here's the best part. Aura lets you upload unlimited photos and videos. Plus, the frame comes in a premium gift box with no price tag, so it feels like a classy, well thought out gift, even if you bought it last minute. Guys, you can't gift wrap togetherness, but you can frame it. So for a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames named #1 by Wirecutter by using promo code CAMPEA at the checkout. That's AURAFrames.com, promo code Campea. This deal is exclusive to our listeners and frames sell out fast. So order yours now to get it in on time for the holidays. Support the show by mentioning that we sent you at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. Anyway, Rob, whole bunch of information, whole bunch of data to go through there. You, I believe, were in the screening for Avatar when the news broke that Netflix actually took it over. I'm sure you came out of that movie with your phone blowing up.
What was wild was when the credits started to roll, you know, and people were listening to the song because Miley Cyrus
and start turning their phones on.
Yeah, you start seeing phones coming up, and you heard murmuring. Like some people like, oh my God. Like it was wild, dude. It was wild to sit in there and have this happen. And I was there by myself. And my friend James had to leave, who got me into the screening. And it was crazy to see. And then of course I'm sitting there taking a picture of Miley Cyrus. I hadn't even looked yet. I figured I'd look at the pictures or see what was going on. And I was pretty stunned. I mean, look, we've talked about this a lot. Like, where's this going to go? What's going to happen? And I think that my problem with Netflix is, and this is going to seem silly to say, is it's not really a studio as much as it is a content-driven. I mean, you're talking about analytics. And Netflix makes all of it knows it has this whole philosophy about what it's going to make and what it should do and how it should do it. And it's all based on analytics. It's all analytics driven. So first and foremost, they're not thinking, how can we get the best movies made with the best creators? They're thinking about creating a product, content that has to hit these marks. We know that we have to have this happen to get our viewers engaged in the first 5 minutes. So a movie has to open like this. And by definition, what Netflix is doing is not driven by art. It's driven exclusively by analytics and what their data tells them, which means that their philosophy does not allow for innovation. It's only based on data. And the problem with data is that data only exists with things we've already seen and already know. What Netflix doesn't allow so much, and I've heard this from creators, is innovation. If you're only giving people what they've known or seen in the past, you're never going to have, they would never make a Star Wars. You know, they would never make those things where nobody wanted to make Star Wars until Alan Ladd Jr. said, I'm going to take a shot on this Lucas kid. And they made it. So the problem with Netflix is they're artistically not inclined. They're delivering products to get their analytics and their subscribers there. But the thing is, movies are that great collision between art, what the filmmakers want to make, the stories that they want to tell. Netflix would never have greenlit Sinners. It never would have greenlit One Battle After Another. It never would have greenlit a number of films that are probably your favorites or movies that came out this year. I know for a fact that there's producers that I've spoken to that Netflix just didn't want to make their movies because they didn't hit analytics. And they said, nope, that's not for us. People that even have deals at Warner or at Netflix. So to me, that's bad for the business. It's bad for cinema. It's bad for movies in general. Now, that said, if this is going to happen, if Netflix allows Warner Brothers to keep Warner Brothersing, then they will get the benefits of that. They will get those great shows from HBO that will eventually wind up on their service after a certain amount of time. I mean, you know, if HBO, if they want to filter over Dream On and Sex and the City and all their 90s shows, like if they give them a decade to stay on HBO to keep it viable and then move them over, I don't think they're going to want to do that because they're greedy and they're going to want to drive. They're going to be like, you know, we could get more subscribers if we just put all the HBO shows on our service. You know, so keeping HBO as a standalone, that sounds good now. How long is that going to last? We'll see. But that's my fear. And you have a lot of creatives already lining up against this. You know, they're already contacting Washington.
Yeah, but the exact same thing happened. The exact same people were doing it when Disney bought Fox, and that didn't really do anything.
I think that we're diminished as well. I mean, Steve Asbell, who I like to call the quiet king of franchises, is doing the best he can over at Fox, exploiting their IP, whether it's Predator, whether it's Alien, whether it's Planet of the Apes. Now they're making a few original films, but they've been held under, a leash. They don't have autonomy over at 20th Century Fox, and they've got one of the greatest studio executives, the greatest studio heads ever over there in Asbell, who's incredibly creative, very learned, very knowledgeable, and has been with the studio for 30 years. So if they would allow him off the reservation so he can do whatever he wants, it could be something really, really great. But I think that with Netflix, look, if it's going to happen, and it's happening, so I would just hope that the more autonomy Warner Brothers has, if they use that as if they think of it as an incubator and let Warner Brothers do what Warner Brothers does and make whatever they want to make, trust Abdi and DeLuca to do it. Because I'll tell you one thing, Pam Abdi and Mike DeLuca have forgotten more about making movies than Ted Sarandos will ever know. Ted Sarandos, the man who said in October of this past year, we have no interest in acquiring legacy media. Well, Ted, yet another thing you said that didn't necessarily pan out. But look, I'd like to see it all work out for everybody, but I don't think it's overall good for the business. And I don't necessarily think it's great for movies unless Netflix will just embrace theatrical and say, okay, let's let Warner Brothers do what they do. We acquired them and we're going to let them do what they do. But I don't see that happening.
By the way, I got to throw this out there. I've seen a lot of people in the live chat who apparently were not listening at all. Somebody's saying, "Oh, now they're not going to let them release Mortal Kombat 2." Guys, Netflix, if everything goes completely smoothly, and it probably won't, but even if everything goes 100% smoothly, Netflix doesn't actually get Warner Brothers for at least a year. Like some people saying, "Oh no, they're going to cancel Batman 2." No, they're not. First of all, Netflix wouldn't cancel Batman 2. Secondly, they couldn't if they wanted to because they don't actually own Warner Brothers yet. They won't actually own it for at least another year. That's why we went so in depth into this. We were very, very clear about that. Look, I'm going to say this, Rob. When it first came to light, I guess you could say, that Netflix was entering the bidding war, I said in no uncertain terms, this is the worst case scenario. It's absolutely the worst case scenario because Netflix is just going to absorb it all in and we're going to lose one of our most celebrated theatrical release production companies. And this is terrible and this is horrible. And this is by far the worst thing that could possibly happen. Then later we started to hear that Netflix may be actually interested in getting Warner Brothers because they want it as its own independent studio. To which we said at that point, okay, I still don't love it, but my position on Netflix getting it will soften if that's the fact, if that indeed is the case. If they're actually going to get it and they're going to keep DeLuca and Abdi and they're going to let Warner Brothers continue to operate as a studio, and if they're going to continue to let them put movies out theatrically, if that is the case, I still don't love it, but I'm a little bit less against it if that's the case. And Rob, I think that's what this is all going to boil down to is, does long-term Netflix allow Warner Brothers, and listen, they're going to be owned by Netflix. Obviously, Netflix is going to have influence. Of course it will. You pointed out 20th Century under Disney, Lucasfilm under Disney. But if they set up the proper structure where it's like, hey, we give oversight, we give you, Warner Brothers, our division, an annual budget, I don't know, maybe $7 billion a year, whatever. We give you an annual budget. You create content, you create the movies, put them out in theaters, then we get to put them on Netflix when they're done, all that kind of stuff. We might step in and say no sometimes, which like Disney does to some of its own sub studios as well. But if they let DeLuca and Abdi cook, if they let Gunn and Safran, who I'm assuming is going to be a part of the Gunn deal, if they let Gunn and Safran cook, if they let them do what they do, if they do keep Casey Bloys, who I don't know if they are or not, but if they do, let HBO continue to cook. And they stay committed, Rob, to that statement, to those commitments that we're going to have Warner Brothers as standalone. We own them. They're part of our ecosystem now, but we're going to fund them. They make their stuff. We believe it's going to be complementary to what we're doing, which, by the way, remember, Rob, I said that was the one thing the Netflix idea had going for it, is that it would at least be complementary, because whether you're looking at Disney or whether you're looking at Sony or NBC Universal Comcast, if any of them got Warner Brothers, they already do theatrical release studio films. And there would have been a lot more crossover, right? It wouldn't have been as complementary. It would have been more replacing. At least Netflix doesn't have a theatrical wing. At least at Netflix, and again, I'm stretching a bit here to find positives in this, but at least at Netflix, they are now acquiring a company that does something they don't do right now. And if they can embrace that, and that's a big if they can embrace that and really make it complementary, it's a stretch, it could be really interesting. And it could be really good. My fear, of course, Rob, which I think you're probably going to echo, my fear here is that Netflix is full of shit. My fear here is that Ted Sarandos is just a big lying bastard, which I'm not saying he is. That's my fear. And then they're going to get Warner Brothers and go, "Mwahahaha, our next grand scheme in killing movies has come to fruition," and they just shut everything down, which could happen. That's not what they say they're going to do, but that's my fear, Rob. And while I am not panicking today, I am not running around saying the sky is falling today. I'm trying to look at some of the potential positives. I am still yet not feeling very easy about this. I don't know. What's your perspective on all that?
I'm with you. I think the problem is going to be Ted Sarandos is going to say, well, why is it that we're putting up with theatrical releases where some movies make a ton of money and other movies make very little money? Can't we apply analytics and make sure that all of our theatrical releases make a certain amount of money? And maybe we'll use analytics and we'll only make these kinds of movies because they're the ones that always make money.
You know what my answer to that is? My answer to that is this is what I hope somebody in the room with Sarandos, or that he would even recognize himself, is that even the movies they release that don't make as much money, then when they end up on Netflix, do much better than another movie like that just being dropped on Netflix. That's my hope. Hope.
I totally agree with you, but I think that anybody like Netflix, this is my problem with our modern era of, when you're thinking about maximizing profits, and I understand you're in business. It ain't show friends, it's show business. You always want to maximize your profits. The problem is you're dealing with a product that is inherently unstable. You can't, like, if it was stable, everybody would make Star Wars. Everybody would make Marvel movies. Even Marvel movies aren't stable. You've got some that'll be Infinity War and Endgame, which, by the way, Endgame's getting re-released in theaters next September. You've got Infinity War and Endgame. Then how come you wind up with a movie like The Eternals or Quantum Mania that doesn't make those kinds of, and then they're going to start applying analytics to only make, Marvel movies. You can't make great films that way. And I guarantee you, and the thing is, if they could, if Ted Sarandos really knew what he was doing, Electric State wouldn't have cost $300 million and it wouldn't have sucked. And it wouldn't have, The Gray Man, you've got the Russo brothers making 2 movies for you. Why didn't they make, well, because they're not, but they weren't theatrically released, but how come they didn't perform? How come they're not as great as Winter Soldier, Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame? I would say, and I would posit to Ted Sarandos, they don't know how to make movies. Warner Brothers makes movies. That's what they've done for 100 years. Let them make your movies. And as a matter of fact, under Warner Brothers auspices, why not start a genre division like a Blumhouse that's only going to make you horror movies, with a cap at $10 million? bring new talent in. You're way overspending with movies. There's a million things they could do. We'll
But that's
see.
why you bring in DeLuca and Abdi, right? Because like
I
with
agree.
DeLuca and Abdi, you have people now that are literally saying no to Tom Cruise because the projects he wants to do are too expensive.
Right.
You know,
And-
that's
right.
and if
And they should. They
and
should.
again, I'm this is a really, really big if. If Sarandos is smarter than I'm giving him credit for, and if Sarandos is smarter than most of us are giving him credit for, then the idea of getting DeLuca and Abdi and the infrastructure and the history of Warner Brothers, and he sees that all as something they need, then you know what I could see happening in an ideal world? In 2 years, we find out, oh, DeLuca and Abdi have been promoted to head of all film for Netflix, Warner Brothers altogether. Like that, again, this is if he's wise, if he's forward thinking, if he's the idiot that I take him for, and if he's the idiot that I think he is, they won't do it. But I'm choosing to be optimistic that he looked at Abdi and DeLuca and Warner Brothers and saying, yeah, we have dropped the ball historically. Nobody makes worse movies than Netflix. They make a great one out of every 30, 40, or 50. But no studio, nobody producing movies does a worse job than Netflix. They suck. And I'm hoping to believe that, again, that Sandros is smarter than I give him credit for. And he's like, you know what? We need those guys. We need Warner Brothers. We need DeLuca and Abdi. We need James Gunn and Peter Safran. We need Casey. We need maybe Zaslav. I don't know. We need to bring them in to give us that area of the business that we don't do. And then hopefully we can learn how to improve our side of the business as well. I might be way over optimistic here on this, Rob, because this can go really bad really fast, but I'm hoping that's what they're doing.
I'll tell you something else. You know, they have the most knowledgeable executive about the history of film in terms of Warner Brothers catalog and most of the catalogs of the other studios at Warner Brothers, named George Feltenstein. I always joke that somebody should make him a worldwide film czar because he literally knows where every negative is. And they have a division at Warner Brothers called Warner Archive. And Warner Archive and George Feltenstein's team is in charge of going back into their rich history. And they have both MGM movies and Warner Brothers movies. And they've been doing new restorations of things like The Searchers that are amazing, or High Society, and all of Warner Brothers' rich history, which now, if Netflix is going to own all those Warner Brothers movies, all of them, they need to go back and they need to promote George Feltenstein to make sure that the hundreds, thousands of movies and shows are getting preserved properly. Because as we just saw with the remastering of Mad Men, they completely botched it with the wrong aspect ratio. So you actually see crew people in their 4K remaster because nobody's doing anything correctly anymore. And they need to do that because Warner Brothers has, I mean, you go back even to the 70s. There's Warner Brothers movies that need to be preserved that no one's ever seen, that have sat on a shelf, like Ken Russell's The Devils. Let's get all that stuff out there. Warner Brothers should be one of the gems of Netflix. They should start carving out and make new sections on Netflix to showcase Warner Brothers' 100-year history of cinema. But none of that's going to be analytics driven. They've got to do it because they want to. They have to love. It can't just be about analytics. They buy the studio and they have to let the people that are creative, that love movies, get in there and start doing what they do. Because all Sarandos knows is money and analytics. And unfortunately, he's now in a business where a studio they've been purveyors of art for 100 years, the art that has fueled America. And I hope, I mean, that's a little highfalutin, but I hope he thinks of it that way, because otherwise, where are we going to be? I mean, dopamine hits for the rest of time. I want to see people still create and make cool things. We'll see.
All right. Well, guys, look, this could be the single most apocalyptic thing that has ever happened in the history of the world of film. I go back to the very first thing I ever said when I found out Netflix was going to enter into the bidding war, that this would be the absolute worst possible scenario. Since then, they've made certain verbal commitments that they actually want to keep Warner Brothers intact. They want to keep HBO as a separate individual thing. They want to keep putting out Warner Brothers films theatrically. Okay, so if they do all those things, maybe some good can come out of it. Maybe. I'm not going to lie to you, though. While I'm trying to be as optimistic as possible, and while I'm trying to look at the actual facts, and as I'm trying to see the potential in all this, I ain't going to lie. I'm still very nervous as a film fan. As a student of film, as somebody who is historically, I've loved film my whole life, and this still makes me very nervous. There is potential upside. There is. But this could also be apocalyptic, and we're just going to have to wait to see how it all turns out. I want to remind everybody that there were some people who thought Disney taking over Fox was also going to be apocalyptic, and it actually ended up okay. But again, I don't know. We'll have to see how this goes. Guys, question is for you. What do you think about this? Netflix has apparently won the bidding war, but there's still a long road ahead of us. They're more than at least a year away from actually taking it over. What do you think about their thoughts about keeping HBO going, keeping Warner Brothers going, keeping Theatrical going? Do you think they actually mean it? Do you think they're lying through their teeth? Do you think some good can come out of it? Do you think this is all going to be the apocalypse? Whatever you guys think, jump down to the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure you like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget, we have a daily podcast called the John Campea Show podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app of choice. Go and subscribe to it today so it'll be there when you need it.